It was supposed to be another quiet night at the gas station. The late shift rarely saw more than a few customers, mostly truckers passing through, or the occasional insomniac grabbing a snack. The night felt off from the start, though. There was a heavy fog rolling in, swallowing the empty highway in both directions. It felt like I was the only person left alive in the world. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard the chime of the door. A man walked in, looking like he'd stepped straight out of the fog itself. He was tall and lean, his face gaunt and pale, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes looked worn, jeans that had seen better days and a faded green jacket that looked about 2 sizes too big. I gave him a quick nod. "How's it going?" He didn't respond. He just wandered to the back of the store, moving in this slow, almost robotic way. I watched him disappear down the aisle, his footsteps unnaturally soft for a guy his size. Minutes passed. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up on me. It was just another late-night customer, I told myself. Nothing weird about it. But then I realized he hadn't come up to the counter. No drinks, no snacks, nothing. Just silence. I leaned over the counter trying to see where he was. The store wasn't big, but somehow I couldn't see him anymore. I stepped out from behind the register and walked down the aisles. Each row of shelves was empty. When I reached the back corner of the store, I found him standing there. Just standing, staring at the empty space on the wall like he'd forgotten what he came for. "Hey man, you okay?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stood there facing the wall. His breathing was slow and heavy, like he was concentrating on something I couldn't see. I took a step closer, but something in my gut told me not to get too close. "Sir, do you need help with something?" Finally, he turned his head just slightly, enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. His eyes, they were wide, bloodshot like he hadn't blinked in hours. His mouth twitched, a nervous, involuntary movement. "I'm waiting," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I swallowed hard. Waiting for what? He didn't answer me. He just kept staring at the wall, his body rigid like he was glued in place. I backed up slowly, deciding it was better to leave him alone. As I turned to head back to the counter, I heard him mutter again, almost too low to hear. "She's coming. She always does." I tried to shake off the chills running down my spine. I went back to the register, keeping an eye on the security camera, which gave me a clear view of the back aisle. The guy didn't move. He stayed there, standing like a statue, eyes locked on that same blank wall. The hours dragged on. No other customers came in, and the fog outside seemed to grow thicker. The clock struck 3 a.m. and still, the man didn't move. By then, I didn't know if I should call someone. The guy wasn't causing trouble, but there was something deeply unsettling about him. Then, at exactly 3:15, the power cut out. The entire gas station went black. The only light came from the dim emergency exit signs and the faint glow of my phone screen. My stomach dropped. This wasn't normal. Not in a place that stayed open 24/7. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and flicked it on, aiming it toward the back of the store. He was gone. I hurried to the aisle where I'd last seen him, shining the light in every direction. The shelves were empty, no sign of the man. I moved toward the door, trying to see if he'd gone outside, but the fog was so thick I couldn't even see my own car parked out front. That's when I heard it. A soft, scraping noise, like nails dragging against metal. It was coming from the back of the store. My heart pounded as I slowly made my way toward the sound. The scraping grew louder as I approached the back storage room, a part of the station where no customers were allowed. I opened the door, aiming the flashlight inside. He was there, crouched on the floor, his back to me. His hands were scratching at the metal door that led to the loading dock. His fingernails were torn and bloody, but he didn't stop. He didn't seem to notice me at all. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What the hell are you doing?" He stopped, his body stiffening. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head to look at me over his shoulder. His eyes, wide, bloodshot, crazed, locked onto mine. "She's here," he whispered, his voice shaking. "She's always here." And then, before I could react, there was a loud, violent knock from the other side of the metal door. 3 sharp bangs that echoed through the tiny room, each one sending a jolt of terror through my chest. I stumbled back, pointing the flashlight at the door, but there was nothing, just the same cold, unyielding metal. The man slowly stood up, his body swaying like a puppet on strings. He smiled, an awful, twisted grin. "You can't stop her," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one can." Before I could move, he lunged at the door, banging his fists against it, screaming for her to let him in. I backed away, fear taking over, and sprinted out of the room. I ran for the front door, but when I stepped outside, the fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a foot ahead. The knocking grew louder, echoing even out there. I never went back inside. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone and the store was empty. They said it was probably just some crazy guy, but I know what I saw. That night, something came for him, and maybe one day it'll come for me too. I'm a 21-year-old girl, still trying to juggle my college classes, my internship, and the late-night study sessions. It was one of those exhausting days where I just wanted to get home and crash. The clock in my car blinked 1:30 a.m., and I still had about an hour to drive. I'd been pushing it, trying to make it on an empty tank, but I knew I had to stop for gas. I pulled into an old gas station that I hadn't been to before. The place looked run-down, dimly lit, and completely deserted. The kind of place you wouldn't stop at unless you were desperate, which I was. There was only one other car, a beat-up truck at the far end of the lot, parked in the shadows. I couldn't see anyone inside, and the store looked like it had closed hours ago. I felt a little nervous, but I told myself to relax. I've been driving at night for years, and I know how to keep my wits about me. Still, something about the empty station made me uneasy. I hurried to start pumping gas, glancing around every few seconds. The only sound was the dull hum of the gas pump. That's when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw him, a man walking toward me from the shadows near the truck. I immediately felt a knot of fear in my stomach. He was tall, probably in his 40s, wearing an old dirty jacket, and his hair looked greasy, hanging limply over his face. I could feel his eyes on me as he got closer. I'm just a young girl, alone in the middle of nowhere, and now this strange man was walking directly toward me. My heart started pounding in my chest. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice raspy and unsettling. I shook my head quickly. "No, I'm fine, thanks," I said, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the fear in my own voice. He didn't stop. He kept getting closer, too close. My hands started shaking as I tried to finish pumping the gas, but I couldn't focus. His presence was overwhelming, like he was sizing me up. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he muttered, his voice lower now, almost like he was warning me. I tried to keep cool. "Yeah, well, I'm almost done," I said, my voice barely steady. Suddenly, he leaned in close, his breath sour and hot against my face. His eyes were cold, empty, and he whispered, "You're lucky I found you before someone else did." I froze. Fear shot through me like ice. I yanked the nozzle out of my tank, ready to run, but before I could move, his hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, way too tight. "I think you should come with me," he growled, his voice dripping with menace. My heart raced, and I could barely breathe. I pulled back as hard as I could. "Let me go!" I screamed. His eyes widened, but he didn't let go. Instead, he smiled, a sick, twisted grin that sent chills down my spine. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. I managed to tear my arm free and ran as fast as I could to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I could hardly get the keys into the ignition. I looked up for a split second and saw him walking toward me again, his eyes locked on me like I was prey. I finally got the engine started and floored it, screeching out of the gas station and onto the empty highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. My whole body was trembling as I drove, but I couldn't stop. His words echoed in my mind. "You're lucky I found you." What did he mean? What could have happened if I hadn't escaped? I didn't slow down until I was back in the city, surrounded by streetlights and other cars. Even then, I couldn't shake the fear. I kept looking in the mirror, half expecting to see that man's truck behind me. I never told anyone what happened that night, but after that, I made a promise to myself. I'd never stop for gas late at night again. It was a Friday night, and the air was thick with humidity, the kind that made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. I had taken the late-night shift at the gas station to help pay off my student loans, and most nights were uneventful. The clock ticked past midnight, and the occasional car would pull in, usually a tired traveler or a group of teenagers looking for a late-night snack. Tonight, however, the atmosphere felt different. Heavy and oppressive, like a storm brewing just out of sight. Around 1 a.m., a car rolled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was an old sedan, rusty and beat up, and I watched as it parked under the flickering light. The driver stepped out and I felt a chill run down my spine. He was tall, wearing a long black coat that seemed out of place for the warm night, and his face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the entrance, his eyes hidden beneath the brim. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my stomach. I smiled as he walked in, trying to remain professional. "Welcome to Greenway Gas. How can I help you?" I said, forcing cheer into my voice. He paused for a moment, looking around as if taking in every detail of the store. Finally, he stepped up to the counter, placing a small plastic bottle of water down. "Just this," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I rang him up, trying to maintain eye contact, but his gaze remained fixed on the floor. As I handed him his change, I couldn't help but notice a strange smell lingering around him, a mix of damp earth and something sweet, like decaying fruit. "Do you need gas?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He shook his head slowly. "Not tonight." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back toward the door, the bell jingling behind him. I watched as he climbed back into his car, feeling a strange compulsion to keep an eye on him. But as he started the engine, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. His car's back seat was full of what looked like trash bags, piled high and bulging. Suddenly, he slammed the door shut and looked up, locking eyes with me. His expression was unreadable, and I felt a jolt of fear as I quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the register. After a few minutes, I dared to glance back outside. To my relief, he was gone, the sound of his tires crunching on the gravel fading into the night. I exhaled, trying to shake off the lingering dread, but the relief was short-lived. Just after 2 a.m., the bell above the door jingled again, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked up, and my heart dropped. It was him again, but this time he was not alone. Behind him, a second figure slipped into the store, cloaked in shadows. "Can I help you?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound steady. The first man stepped closer, and the second figure remained back, hidden in the dim light. "You remember me?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound friendly. "You just came in a little while ago." He smiled, but there was something cold in his eyes. "We've come to talk about something." Before I could respond, the second figure stepped into the light, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a woman, but her face was smeared with dirt and her clothes were torn, as if she had been running through the woods. Her eyes darted around the store, filled with panic. "Please, help me," she gasped, looking directly at me. "He's going to—" Before she could finish, the man grabbed her arm, yanking her back toward him. "She's fine. We just need a moment." I felt frozen, torn between the desire to help her and the instinct to flee. I glanced around the store, searching for an escape. I was alone with them, and my heart raced as the man tightened his grip on the woman. "Call the police," I thought, but my fingers trembled as I fumbled for my phone beneath the counter. Suddenly, the woman broke free, darting toward the door. "Please," she shouted, "you have to help me." But the man lunged after her, grabbing her just inches from the exit. I watched in horror as he pulled her back into the store, her cries echoing through the night. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The man turned to me, his eyes darkening. "Just keep quiet and nobody gets hurt." Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady. The operator answered, and I whispered my location, telling them about the situation. But before I could provide any details, the man snatched my phone from my hand and tossed it behind the counter, shattering it against the wall. "Enough of this," he growled. The woman trembled, her eyes pleading with me for help. The man lunged at me, but I ducked and ran for the back room. I heard the woman screaming behind me, the sound piercing through the darkness as I stumbled into the storage area, heart pounding in my ears. I fumbled for the emergency exit, praying it would be unlocked. Just as I reached for the door, I heard footsteps closing in on me. The man was coming, and I had to escape. With a burst of adrenaline, I flung open the door and dashed into the alley behind the gas station. The cool night air hit my face, but I didn't stop to breathe. I ran down the alley, heart racing, glancing back just in time to see the man bursting through the back door. "Get back here!" he shouted. I sprinted towards the main road, fear propelling me forward. I could hear him getting closer, but I didn't dare look back. I ran until I reached a neighboring house, banging on the door with all my strength. A light flickered on, and a man opened the door, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on?" "Help! There's someone trying to hurt me," I gasped, and he ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. As I caught my breath, I glanced outside through the window. The man stood in the alley, scanning the street, his hat casting a shadow over his face. The police arrived minutes later, and I could hear their sirens piercing the night air. They rushed to the gas station, and I anxiously awaited news. After what felt like an eternity, an officer came back to the house. "We caught him," he said, his face serious, "but there's no sign of the woman." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" The officer explained that when they searched the gas station, the only person they found was the man, who had claimed he was simply looking for a ride. The woman was nowhere to be found, and all they found in his car were the trash bags, which were filled with discarded clothing and belongings, but no signs of her. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I learned through news reports that the woman had been reported missing from a nearby town, and police were investigating her disappearance further. The thought that I could have helped her haunted me. Then, one night, as I sat at home replaying the events in my mind, there was a knock at my door. My heart raced as I opened it to find a familiar figure standing there, tired, dirty, and alive. It was the woman. I got away, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know if I'd make it back. I thought he'd find me. I pulled her inside and locked the door, relief flooding through me. She explained how she had escaped while the man was distracted and had hidden in the woods nearby until she felt safe enough to return. That night, I learned the true horror of what had almost happened. Not just to me, but to her as well. The gas station became a memory, a place filled with shadows and terror, but it was also a place where fate had given her another chance. Though the gas station still stood, I never returned to work there again. Even as the world moved on, the memory of that night lingered. A chilling reminder of how darkness can slip into the most ordinary moments.